Good evening, everyone. Tonight is a regular meeting of the South Kingstown Planning Board. The date is Tuesday, February 25th, 2025. The time is 6:35 p.m. The first item on our agenda is roll call. Susan Axelrod.
Here.
Joe Murphy. Here. Robin Pothier. Here. Peter DiStefano. Here. Liz Karp. Here. Caper Wilson.
Here.
And Maria Mack is here. Before we continue with the remaining items on our agenda, including the consent agenda, we have a request from staff to move 2 items up due to the fact that they're continuations. Item number 2, which is a public hearing, major subdivision, comprehensive permit, preliminary plan review, Fieldstone Farms, and item number 5, major land development, conceptual pre-application, comprehensive permit, the lofts at Fairgrounds. Is everyone okay with moving those up?
Assuming we got the extension. Assuming we got the extension to amount of time.
I'm sure we'll find out when Jamie gives us an update. Everyone all right with that?
Clarity, Joe, is that a motion to move, adjust the
No,
agenda?
No, it's a
we just
question
agreed
before the motion.
by consensus to move them up on the agenda. So, Fieldstone Farm, Jamie, you have an update for us and a request?
Yes, just bear with me one moment.
Do we need to make a motion to do that?
So, Madam Chair, we do have a request from Fieldstone Farms to continue their public hearing to your April meeting. That would be April 22nd. The applicant was not available at your March meeting, so that's why there's the 2-month request. They have consented to an extension up until April 30th. We will work with the applicant's representative to get more than a 6-day extension to your time to act.
I would think that would be necessary since we wouldn't be meeting again before then.
So we have the extension?
We only have an extension until April 30th, and obviously that's not practical. We would need an extension for probably to the May meeting.
So again, it would be appropriate to, again, this hearing would open, and then there would be a motion to continue the hearing until your April 22nd meeting.
Peter, question. If there's only an agreement to an impractical date, how do we handle that in our motion?
So just based on prior experience, based on prior experience with this applicant and this council, I'm not really concerned that they wouldn't grant a further continuance, which will at the April meeting. So I think at this point you could continue to the April meeting, and there are some applicants I would be concerned with, but not this one.
Very good, thank you, Joe.
Given that, and I hate to just rely on some applicants, we would give it and some we wouldn't, I would suggest that we give the extension until the March meeting, at which time, between now and then, the staff can talk to the applicant, and then at the March meeting, we'll extend it again, providing that they give us the full 60 days extension.
Yep. Just, Madam Chair, their council will not be at the March meeting. So if, again, I would try and reiterate what Attorney Schwartz has said, that this applicant has worked with the planning board through the process, and again, we're relatively confident that they would grant an additional extension beyond April 30th.
I don't think that the applicant has to be here at the next meeting in order to get that extension. That's something that staff can get them through a discussion, and then at the next meeting, based on staff telling us they got that extension, and then we would extend it in the additional 30 days.
But we received over 10 phone calls today about whether this meeting was going to take place or not. If you continue it to your March meeting, we're going to have that same, I don't want to call it a burden, but that people will have the perception that there is a meeting in March. And again, I understand Mr. Murphy's point, but working with Joelle and their team, that we're relatively confident that we would get an extension they understand that it is in all likelihood in their best interest to grant the commission more than an 8-day extension. That basically only allows you to potentially close the public hearing on April 22nd, and you would have to have a special meeting within a week to act on the application. So,
I think it makes sense for us, particularly in the interest of the public, to make a note of the April 22nd, to make that motion, and then that would be reflected on the town's website. And would someone like to make a motion to that effect?
Madam Chair, I believe we have a representative that would like to
Oh.
speak.
Hello, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Julissa Arce on behalf of the applicant, and we would consent to an extension of the timeline to make a decision by the planning board.
Excellent, thank you, that's always good to hear.
Thank you.
So would someone like to make that motion? I'll make that motion. We have a motion from Joe. Do we have a second? Second from Peter. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Next agenda,
Do you need to reiterate what we just, that it's not going to be heard tonight?
for anyone in the audience who did not understand our motion, the Fieldstone Farm public hearing, major subdivision comprehensive permit, preliminary plan review will not be heard this evening. Our next agenda item that has been moved up, major land development conceptual pre-application comprehensive permit, the lofts at Fairground. Jamie?
so Madam Chair, again, on your agenda, item 5, the lofts at Fairgrounds, the landowner and applicant has asked that the planning board not here this evening and add it to your agenda at your next regularly scheduled meeting in March, which I believe
date
is
of that
March
is-
25th. March 25th.
Very good, thanks, Jamie. Would someone like to make a motion to continue this item to our March regular meeting on the 25th? Motion from Liz, is there a second?
Second.
Second from Caper. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries.
Thank you.
All right, back to our ordinary order of the agenda. Consent agenda consists of approval of minutes January 14th, 2025, January 28th, 2025, and the report of the administrative officer. If there are no corrections or additions, would someone like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'd like to make a correction.
Okay?
On the January 14th, I'm listed as absent, but I was present, and I'm only concerned because when it comes time for reinstatement, they're going to count how many times I missed, right?
Yep. Anything else? Would someone like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion from Caper. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Susan. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next, agenda item, major subdivision combined conceptual master and preliminary plan, the lots on Columbia. Jamie?
Madam Chair, as an update from last month's meeting, you asked staff to clearly articulate in a motion, favorable motion, the aspects associated with the infrastructure for the proposed lots. We had revised our motion, and contained in that motion is clarity associated with when and how the infrastructure goes in. Primarily, whoever builds first would be responsible for building the infrastructure, utilities, as well as driveway, as well as drainage, as well as landscaping. East, 10 feet past the property line to the rear lot. So again, if lot number 2 is built first, they're building their driveway, their infrastructure, and then they're going approximately 80 or 90 feet past that to provide access to the lot number 3, the rear lot. Or the further, they're all rear lots, but the most interior lot.
Thanks, Jamie. We do have a draft motion for consideration that begins on page 3. Are there any thoughts, corrections, additions to this from anyone? Joe?
I'm glad to see that condition of approval number 5 states that the landscaping will be installed prior to the CO for lot 2 or 3. I'm still a little concerned that the invasive species is not addressed. I know that there has been some concern in a past meeting from staff whether that could be enforced or not. I guess I'm still not in an understanding why it cannot be enforced, that the invasive species is basically mitigated. We routinely put in subdivisions that vegetation has to survive a year or 2 years, so I don't see that being a far stretch from saying that the invasive species has to be mitigated for a year or 2 years. So that's my one concern.
Thanks, Joe. Peter, is that something that you can weigh in on with regard to either conditions or findings?
So I think as a starting point, this developer has agreed to remove knotweed. I mean, is that accurate? That's my recollection anyway. So just from that standpoint? No. No? Oh, I'm sorry.
Hello, James Callahan on behalf of Mr. Hallberg. We can control the invasive species on Mr. Hallberg's property. We can't control the species
Right.
crossing over from the neighbors, and he will do his best in his lot, but aside from that, we can't go on their property. So that's the issue.
Understood, thank you. I think Joe was just pointing out that there didn't seem to be a reference from our conversations in the meeting.
So I'll try and articulate why we didn't include it in our motion. That area where the invasives have been identified will be subject to landscaping. The developer has stated and testified throughout the process he does not know when this project will be sold and or developed. So it is extremely difficult to identify when, how, and for what period of time invasive species need to be managed and controlled. In addition, there's nothing in your subdivision regulations that addresses or requires a developer to manage or control invasive species. It has been identified in this process that the invasive species exist on this property and abutting properties. So, you control it on one, it's still going to exist on the other, and the minute you stop controlling it on one, it's going to come back. And again, from our perspective, these lots may be developed next year or 10 years from now. And there's no regulatory requirement to manage this type of situation. And the difficulty is if it's included in a motion and they don't do it, they're not in compliance with their approval. And that becomes a quagmire as it relates to enforcement. How do you enforce it? What provisions do you have or mechanisms do you have to enforce the control of knotweed, which is extremely difficult to eradicate? So I think in this scenario, when the lot is developed, that area will be disturbed, will be re-landscaped, and that's part of the revegetation. I think the applicant has said they will do their best as a landowner to improve the property, control the invasives to the best of their ability, but we didn't see the rational nexus between the approval and the regulatory requirement. And again, we did discuss this briefly with council on that, and just didn't see the tie-in. And I understand the commission's concern, the neighbors' concerns, as well as individual members of the board. It was just we couldn't find the necessary tie-in.
So could we add at the time of development and watch for 2 years at that point?
You're requiring the applicant to landscape areas of the property that aren't required to be landscaped, per your regulations. So again, at the time of development, the entire northerly property line has to be disturbed, topsoils, removed, grass mulch beds installed, as well as all of those evergreens. So that entire northern area, at the time of development, to Joe's point you mentioned, landscaping goes in prior to a CO. So when the lot is developed, that entire northerly property line will change. And the instance is those invasives really only have an opportunity to be managed when someone's on site day to day. Someone's mowing the lawn on, a weekly, bi-weekly basis. It's just difficulty in a subdivision scenario when you don't know when the land's going to be developed and or managed. It's different than I would potentially have more provisions if this was a condo project or an apartment complex managed by one group or entity and we knew development was date certain.
So Jamie, and we do appreciate the developer willingness to manage this and the fact that they reached out to URI and got the information as far as invasive plant management. So just want to clarify that you are saying that by virtue of the fact that they need to install landscaping, that essentially, in effect, will require removal, mitigation of the invasive.
If you look at what Jay Parker put up on the screen in the development, you'll see, again, the dark circles. Those are evergreens to be planted. The yellow, those are retention basins needed to maintain storm drainage. Just to the south of that are utility trenches, and just a little bit south of that's the driveway. So the driveway to the north, all of that land is going to be manipulated for the installation of utilities, storm drainage, and an evergreen buffer. So someone needs to maintain and manage that during that growing period. And again, any invasive species thrives in disturbed soil. So again, some of this is going to be up to the homeowners to maintain that area. And if one homeowner is maintaining it, but an abutter is not, you're fighting a very uphill battle.
Other questions for Jamie or Peter? And obviously, those conifers should not mind wet feet if they're adjacent to retention areas.
Again, those are shallow basins to handle stormwater runoff. They're not your standard.
Regardless, yeah.
They're more
Choice
rain
of-
garden-like than
Yep.
detention basin.
Choice will be important. Susan?
So I'm also concerned about the invasive species, but I accept that explanation and that timeline as a valid reason not to try to add that into our conditions. That, to me, that makes sense.
Anything else? We have a motion that begins on page 3. Would someone like to make that motion?
Do you want me to do that? I can do that. The South Kingstown Planning Board hereby grants combined conceptual master and preliminary plan approval to the lots on Columbia subdivision, a 3-lot major subdivision for single-family development located at 93 Columbia Street. Scott Hallberg, applicant owner. This approval is based on the site plan set submitted with the application titled Minor Subdivision, the Hallberg Plat. Location 93 Columbia Street, South Kingstown, Rhode Island, AP 57-1, Lot 195, Sheets 1 through 4, dated June 9th, 2023, with revisions through December 16th, 2024, prepared by East Greenwich Survey, or E. Greenwich Surveyors, LLC, 1050 Main Street, Suite 31, East Greenwich, Rhode Island, 02818. This approval is based on the following findings of fact and conditions of approval. Findings of fact A through F. Conditions of approval 1 through 7, with no amendments.
We have a motion from Susan. Do we have a second? Second from Peter. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Our next agenda item is a public hearing, minor land development preliminary plan with Unified Development Review, 349 Main Street. Is there anyone representing the applicant?
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the board. As you know, for the record, John C. Revens Jr., Revens St. Pierre and Wiley, 946 Centerville Road in Warwick, on behalf of the applicant. Excuse me here. I'll move this out of the way. You want me to go ahead, Madam Chair? Thank you. We're here this evening for your consideration of our application for Assessors Plat 56-3, Lot 48, widely known as Sheldon's Furniture. The store has been a fixture on Main Street for more than 125 years. The proposed use is consistent with other historical uses in the district, such as the former Lodgewood Inn, which was converted into an inn in 1925 and demolished in 2016. My client carefully weighed the options to redevelop the property, including keeping the use as a furniture store. After an extensive review, my client thought a hotel use would be the most compatible with the village and would be the least impactful and most beneficial to the abutting properties and the uses within those properties. We are proposing to convert the property into a hotel with 20 guest rooms and approximately 660 square feet on the first floor, dedicated to a food or coffee service ancillary to the hotel. There would not be a restaurant-style kitchen on the premises, only small appliances such as a microwave, a toaster oven, or a coffee maker, things of that nature, a warming station, or a tray with ice to keep things cold. Each room in the hotel would have a minimum of 240 square feet as required by the ordinance, and the renovation and restoration of the property would include the demolition of the existing staircase located at the northwest corner of the structure and replacing it with a 12 by 11 foot structure, which would include a passenger elevator, an accessible entrance, and a staircase. Other than that change in the structure, there would be no other changes in the footprint of the structure. The parking requirement for the furniture store is one parking space for each 350 square feet of gross leasable floor area. The building has approximately 14,000 square feet, which would result in a parking requirement that exists now for the furniture store of 40 parking spaces, which, as you know, in a CD district is reduced by half, which would mean that the required parking on the site for the existing use is 20 spaces. There are presently no parking spaces on the site. The proposal before you to convert the premises into a hotel would require one parking space for each room, plus 2 spaces per 12, rooms for a total of 24 spaces, reduced by 50%, which means the parking requirement for the proposed use is 12, where the parking requirement for the existing use is 20. In the proposed plan, we have 5 valet parking spaces, which, if approved, would reduce the parking deficit to 7, which is 13 less than the current parking deficit for the existing structure. My client has made arrangements for off-site parking at a nearby property at 446 Main, parcel 56-3, lot 39, to the extent it becomes necessary for the operation of the hotel. As you are aware, there is considerable street parking available in the village, as well as a substantial municipal parking lot. All of the legal details and ordinance citations for the relief that we're seeking in this application are found in the application, in the minutes from the TRC advisory review submitted on January 10th of this year, and the project review memo from the planning department dated February 25th of this year. So I don't think there's any reason for me to cite all of those, because I'm sure you've all reviewed them prior to tonight's meeting. With me this evening is Jeff Kamens, who is a principal from J2 Properties, and Matthew McGeorge, who is the architect for the project. Mr. Kamens and Mr. McGeorge have prepared a brief PowerPoint presentation to review with you, and will be happy to respond to any questions that you or any members of the public may have. In the draft memo that you have from the planning department, there is a draft motion for your consideration in the project review memo, which we concur with, and we respectfully request that you approve it as it's been drafted. Thank you very much for your consideration, and with your permission, Madam Chair, Mr. Kamens and Mr. McGeorge will briefly do the PowerPoint presentation, unless there's anything you'd like to ask me now.
Yes, please proceed. I do want to ask staff, in the staff comments, there is a sentence about the project has not been certified complete. Can you give us a little more information on that?
Again, I think we were waiting for some additional technical information regarding parking and off-site parking. So I will review that in completeness in a moment.
Okay, please continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gentlemen?
Good evening. My name is Matthew McGeorge. I'm the architect of record of the project. I think I'd like to be brief so you guys can get on to the parking and other site issues. For us, this is a relatively simple adaptive reuse project. Perfect. And as you know, the applicant owner has submitted for grant money from the Main Street program, which was awarded. The intent is to effectively refurbish the Main Street facade. The existing rear is probably where the biggest impact architecturally is for the project. A stair tower was constructed that doesn't meet any dimensional codes, so we'll actually have to rip that out just to meet the current codes. In so doing, there's an existing hydraulic elevator that's non-conforming as well. So as part of the redevelopment of this rear corner, we will be removing the hydraulic elevator, replacing it with a code-compliant fire-rated stair, and providing a, let's zoom in here. If you can see it, so this corner here, where the stair is, there's currently the non-conforming hydraulic elevator. We're proposing to replace it with a code-compliant egress stair and provide a code-compliant 4-story gurney-rated elevator, and provide a VPL, which is a vertical person lift, to create the accessible entrance from where guests would arrive at the rear parking area. And that would be a single-story addition, as you can see here. So the existing condition, the stair tower would come down. On the right here, the new elevator tower would occur, and the new ADA accessible entrance with the VPL and access off the proposed parking at the rear of the site. Other than that, there's not a lot for me to cover. We have a team of engineers, code consultants, structural engineers, et cetera, that are awaiting approval at the planning level that'll be engaged to ensure that everything is compliant. At the TRC meeting, we spoke with the fire marshal about the kitchen, and to Jack's point earlier, it'll effectively be a warming kitchen. And based on the size, it's not even classified as an assembly use. It would be a business use because it's less than 50 occupants and so on and so forth. So that being said, if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Jeff to answer the business operations and bigger questions you might have.
Maria, I have just
Go ahead,
one
Liz.
quick question.
Sure.
That cafe, restaurant, warming kitchen in the front, I know this came up before. Is that going to be open to the public separately from hotel use?
I'll defer to the owner on that. I could answer architectural questions, but he'll be able to answer
Okay.
the operations questions.
Thank you.
Susan?
So can I just comment on the architecture?
Sure.
This design you have here is lovely.
Thank you.
I wasn't so happy with the original. This is, I think, beautifully in keeping with the style of downtown and the sense of place we have downtown and the historic nature of that building, and especially if you're retaining that copper. Thank you. Thank you for making that effort. That's really nice.
You're welcome. That's the intent, is to try to, celebrate the main street that you have.
Jeff Cammons here. To answer your question, we're not sure yet whether or not that will be open to the public. That's still something we're considering.
One of the reasons I bring it up, because if it is open to the public, does that have an impact on the parking? We need additional parking if the public is going to be going in and out.
Yeah, it will. The spots that we have at 446 Main here, we have 35 additional parking spots over what's required currently, between the two uses of Muse Tavern and there's a glass blowing shop, manic training. So the total required spaces for those two uses are 70, and we have 105 parking spots between the two parcels.
A question about parking. Obviously, you've shown on the plan that you have off-site parking. How can you ensure the long-term availability of that parking?
I own that property as well, so I can ensure it.
Okay, sounds good. Other
Can I just
questions?
clarify that, Madam Chair, so there's not confusion?
Yes, and just restate your name for the record,
Sure.
please.
John Revens. As we all know, ownership of any property is not forever. And to elaborate a little bit, you have an unusual provision in your ordinance that allows you to designate an off-street parking location like this as part of the approval. And then it goes on to say that you can put a lien on that parcel, the other parcel, the welcoming parcel for the parking, which stays there forever, unless somebody comes back and asks permission, who's ever sitting here at that time, if they can change it to some other parcel or get relief from it. So what we're proposing, so we're clear, is yes, we would make that parking available as long as we're able to keep it available, which could be for decades. But we're not proposing to put a lien on it and dedicate it to this use as if it was part of this parcel. And our reasoning and our argument to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that we're reducing the nonconformity with parking by translating this use from the furniture store to the hotel. So by the codes of ordinances in the town, we only need 12 spaces for the hotel. We needed 20 for the furniture store. There's 0 spaces there now, so they're non-compliant by 20. We'd be non-compliant by 7. And we propose to have those 7 plus others at this other location on Main Street, but we're not proposing that that be liened. And when I read that ordinance, and it's just my own comment without thoroughly researching it. I don't know how, without an enabling act, any municipal entity could, quote, lien somebody's property by a decision of the board, but I'm not trying to argue that or debate it or get too distracted by it, but I thought it was a very strange provision, and there's no definition in the ordinance of lien, and there's no reference to it in any state statute, but I don't know when that was adopted. I didn't look at that or where it came from. But we're saying we're reducing the parking requirement, we're going to make it less non-compliant, and for our financing, when you get commercial loans, and all these properties have different loans, not all the same lender, not all the same terms, it would be extremely inhibiting to try to get a 20 or 30-year loan with a 5-year renewable term on a property that if someone sold another property, you could lose your zoning approval. So that really doesn't work in the commercial workspace. So I hope that doesn't offend anybody, and I hope it doesn't dissuade you from supporting this application. But we're confident for the next, 5 or 10 years that wouldn't be a problem using these spaces. And we're going to valet, and Jeff will explain that. Everybody who comes here is going to have the opportunity to valet, so it'll be the hotel's responsibility to take that car and find a legal place to park it for the time that the guest is there. And we think that this is a better use than selling outdoor furniture and mattresses or something, some combination like that could work and that wouldn't require any planning board approval, wouldn't require any zoning relief because it's an existing use as a furniture store. So that's our reasoning. I just wanted to take an extra couple of minutes and explain that, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maria?
I have a couple questions.
Liz and then Susan?
I'm confused. The packet that I have has parking at 10 High Street, and you just explained that it's at 446. Which
Yeah,
is it?
that's a little outdated.
The 10 High is outdated?
Yeah, we realized that wasn't going to work.
Okay.
So, Madam Chair, just as Mr. Commands is working on those handouts, 2 primary revisions were made to the submission that was included in your packet. That was a change from parking located on High Street to parking located at the Muse on Main Street. And the second was the architectural elevations were modified to go back to the cedar shakes and original copper cladding.
It's always good to have revisions, even if they're the night of the meeting.
Thanks.
Liz, did you have additional questions?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Susan?
Yeah, sorry about that.
So I'd like to also understand your parking. Is this parking behind the Muse parking that's already in that lot, or additional parking that you're intending to build?
That's already there.
So there are nights that I've been to the Muse where parking is a premium and there is no space back there. How are you planning to juggle a busy summer season at the Muse with potentially 20 cars from the hotel?
Yeah, we'd have to cone them off and be in communication with the employees at Muse that they can't use those spots. This will be more for overnight parking. The idea is to have guests come in, park in the back with those 5 valet spots, and staff from the hotel will move the cars for overnight parking and coordinate with the guests when they need their car back at the hotel.
Thank you.
Yep.
I think it's my understanding that there are no restrictions in the back parking lot or on Main Street for overnight parking. Am I correct? That there are no restrictions?
I believe not.
So if you were going to valet to a legal overnight spot, you could simply leave the car in the back parking lot or out on Main Street and be equally compliant with our town parking regulations.
Yeah, I suppose that's an option as well. We're trying to reduce
I mean, it's not a great option. I'm not suggesting. I'm just trying to understand when a guest would choose to valet to the back parking lot at the Muse versus simply parking in the lot behind the hotel or out on Main Street.
We're trying to reduce the parking stress that the hotel would create. So as many cars as we can get in a private lot versus in the public lots, the better, in our opinion.
That's good. Thank you very much.
Okay, yep.
Jeff, oh, sorry, Joe, Jeff, the parking on the Muse lot, does that interfere with the zoning compliance for the parking requirements for the Muse itself?
It does not.
Have you confirmed that with the zoning official?
I have not talked to the zoning official, but as far as I can tell, the Muse requires 55 parking spots.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a lot next door. It's 446 Main, Muse is at 456 Main. I know there's some overlap on parking, but it does not, no. No, that building requires 15 spots.
The 446 building, which is the one to the north of the Muse, I got that right?
Correct.
Has 30 spots, and according to our calculation, 15 are required. Is that correct?
Correct.
So that's the lot we're going to use. Now, the Muse parking spills over into that, I'm sure, at night. But for that building that has the glass-blowing business in it and a couple of other businesses, there's more parking than is needed according to the ordinance. So that's the lot that's actually designated, and that's the one I cited when I introduced the project. It's 446 Main.
Joe?
So I'm going to echo what Susan said. I mean, I like going to the Muse. I like meeting my friends at the Muse. I like meeting my family at the Muse. I drive a Toyota Tundra. I haven't been able to park in that in the last 3 to 5 years. I don't even go there anymore because it's difficult to get my Tundra through. I park up there where the Lodgewood used to be. That parking lot is probably the most congested parking lot south of the tower, and probably the most congested parking lot south of Warwick, maybe even further north than that. That is the most congested parking lot anywhere around, and there's never any spots.
Yeah, I hear the concern. We have the 10 High Street location that you saw in the initial package. That was our original intent. There's always spots available there. On paper, it doesn't work because of the use. There's not enough spots to have additional spots to be able to lease. So 10 High Street works better in practice, but we can't do it. So we're doing the best we can to.
When we say to your point, Mr. Murphy, as you know, sometimes the parking requirement under the ordinance is greater than what the tenant needs. And other times, the parking requirement under the ordinance is less than what the tenant needs. And that's your example of the Muse, which we understand. We also have the ability to use the High Street, but under the parking requirement of the ordinance, even though we see the High Street lot as never being full, and the owner's willing to let us use it, the parking that's there doesn't exceed what's required by the ordinance. So they're confident, but it's your judgment at the end of the day, that they'll be able to manage the parking, and you have to weigh that and decide what you think is best.
So where I'm standing right now is I like your project. I like the architectural details that you've done. I like bringing the vibrancy to downtown. The parking, from my perspective, parking imposed does not work just based on how congested that is. So in general, so far, I have a favorable opinion of the project, but I think you need to do better on parking. That's where I'm standing right now.
Well, that's why part of the reason we went to the hotel. But they could, without having to need a planning zoning review, just change the name and refurbish the building and put a furniture store in there with outdoor furniture and mattresses, just as an example, and have 3 floors of furniture, and that requires more parking. So it's a dilemma, which we respect your concern about it, and it's a totally legitimate and appropriate concern, but they feel if the deficit is only 7 under the ordinance, which is what the ordinance says, they can manage that, and they can manage the guests between all these other places, even though the street isn't preferable. But any of us who go, what's the main street that has restaurants? East Greenwich. The street's full all night with people who are avoiding the valet and parking on the street. So there could be a little bit of that with this, but Otherwise, the street's empty at 10:30 or 11 o'clock most nights, if not earlier, for parking purposes. So there is room for these 6 or 7 or 10 extra cars, we think, but that's up to you folks to decide, and you know the town better than I do. You know, it's your community.
I agree with Joe that adaptive reuse is often a very good idea. And I'm assuming that you spent time and energy really looking at the municipal lot and the impacts to that. There already are concerns with the ability of that lot to be adequate for the expected uses. And in fact, the photo that you submitted in your application shows a row of illegally parked vehicles adjacent to the Saugatuck River, which of course results in instant pollution. So just, I think we'd like more information as to how you're going to prevent folks from just parking in the municipal lot and it becoming more or less effective than it already is.
Well, if somebody goes there directly, Madam Chair, like if you check into the hotel and you're out for the day and you come back to go out for dinner or whatever, and if you're not walking to a place in the area, if somebody comes back and chooses to park not with the valet and goes and parks anywhere it's legally allowed, I don't know how, you know, it'd be kind of a challenge for us to control that unless we stop every guest coming in and say, where'd you park? And then, you know, ask them for their keys and say, we got to move the car. But that's, I mean, most of our parking when people would be staying, my sense would be in the evening after they've come back and they're not going back out again. So that's when parking starts to diminish. The demand for parking in the village starts to diminish by, except at the Muse, by 9 o'clock.
I also think the municipal parking lot is there so people can come to town and frequent the businesses
Right.
on Main Street, and that's what these people, I don't go to a hotel and just hang out in the hotel room. I go to a hotel to sleep there, but then I go to the coffee shop and the restaurant, and I frequent Main Street, so I think that would be the intent.
Yep, I'm sorry about this. We're not like, if you want me to stop it, we're not like an extended stay, you know, where somebody moves in and might work from a space for a week or two. These people are going to be people who are coming into town because they're in South County for a reason, whether that's the weather or a wedding or the URI or whatever, and they're going to be out most of the day. So the peak parking is going to be sometime in, you know, after 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And I don't see that as a problem. It would be worse if it was a busy furniture store. You know, if it was, without citing a name, if it was somebody's front porch, and you know what I mean by that, there'd be a heck of a lot more traffic during the daytime when it's busy, coming in and out of the building. And that's allowed now. Thank you.
Susan?
So is it my understanding that you own the Muse as well as that building next door that has Manic and the glass blowing? Like, whose lot actually is that on?
Those two parcels, correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So I wasn't quite clear on Mr. Revan's explanation earlier. If you chose to sell any of these properties, how would that, assuming that guests are using that parking, how would it be retained for use by the hotel if you sold, I suppose the Muse doesn't matter, but if you sold the Manic building or the hotel, how would that transfer?
I think that was your point, right? I'm not leaning the property. You want to?
It's like, I don't want to pick on
Just restate your name,
I'm
please,
sorry,
again.
John Revens. I don't want to start naming businesses because I don't think it's appropriate, but there's lots of businesses in the village that don't have sufficient parking, and we're going to be less underparked than most of them are.
I understand what you're saying, but
So
you're
it's-
also pointing to that lot as an explanation for parking. If you had come to us and said there's no parking, then that's what we would be working with. But you didn't. You came to us and said that you're going to supply 20 parking spaces behind the Manic gym. And so therefore, I'm asking,
Of course.
if 10 years from now, he chooses to sell that property, are we, that was my question. So now that you've thrown out that there's 20 parking spots, I'm asking how we're going to retain those for use at the hotel.
I'm saying we're not. We can't guarantee that. And that came up. That didn't come from us. We were never proposing that parking, but we went to TRC meeting. We got pushed very hard. You got to have parking, you got to have parking, you got to have parking. You know, and we want to see where the parking is going to be. And I said, hey, look, the existing use, which is not a busy place right now, but it could be very easily as a furniture store, requires more parking. We're trying to make the situation better by building out the hotel than it would be if it was a porch, patio, outdoor furniture, and mattress store. So we think this is better for parking. But you have to decide that. So we got pushed, in a not unfairly, you know, to come up with parking alternatives. So that's what we did, because that's what we were told to do at TRC. We never had this in the plan. So then we did that, and the High Street place, which my client came up with first, and he showed it to me, and I said, the zoning requirement is for more spaces than there are there, so we can't do that. So then we went to the 446 Main Street into the Muse and say there's room here, and we own these properties and other, you know, with other people, and we can use that. But it's not a guarantee we could use it forever. But if we all walk down Main Street tomorrow and started looking at the businesses and counting who's got parking and who doesn't, there's a lot of them that don't have enough parking. But this is going to be not a busy place in the daytime, because people are going to come in. Most people arriving don't arrive at 10 o'clock in the morning, but if they do, we'll valet them. And then when they go out, we'll get their car for them, just like they do at every restaurant on Main Street in East Greenwich. And just like, you know, other businesses in town, not in Wakefield, valet cars, without me having to name the places, because we all know where they are. That valet 150 cars, 200 cars, 300 every night. So we're going to do that. But it's pretty minimal impact, we think, and we think it's a reasonable trade-off to add the hotel and eliminate the furniture store. But, you know, you ladies and gentlemen would have to see if you concur with that or not, and we understand that. But that's why, Saxelrod, that's why we offered the parking. Thank you.
Other questions, comments from board members? Robin?
On face value, I can't help but see it as a loss of municipal parking. I think that your ideas may fit an equation, but are very unenforceable. And if I were staying in your hotel, I don't know if I'd be interested in tipping for valet parking when I could just park there and walk in the building, or even if I worked for you. So I guess my question is, how could you really enforce this type of leaving our very limited municipal parking lot available to town residents?
Yeah, well, the valet will be complimentary. There's no fee involved to the end user. You know, parking on Main Street's tough. This is the way we feel we can best try to mitigate it. You know, can we force everybody to do what we're telling them to do? Probably not. But, you know, the instructions when people are coming to check in is, hey, park around back, park in one of our 5 valet spots. Someone from our staff will take your car, park it off-site. When you need it, let us know and we'll bring it back.
I'm not under the impression that the municipal parking is only for town citizens. I mean, business owners or property owners can use the municipal parking, I'm assuming, as well.
Well, what about our other local businesses? They need parking.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Yeah, I don't think you can pick one or the other. I think it's there available, and I think whoever's there can use it. That's what I'm just trying to understand if there was.
I'd like to point out too that,
super confused.
You know, there's 20 rooms here. There's going to be a lot of people coming into this town. It's going to generate a lot of business for the local businesses. You know, you're going to have a lot of people walking around looking to spend money, go out to eat. So I understand your point, but at the same time, I think this brings a lot of value to the businesses in town.
I thought that's who we wanted to park in that parking lot.
Jamie, did you have something?
Madam Chair, if I just can try and bring some, I don't know, factual matters to the discussion. To Mr. DeStefano's point, the municipal lot is for use by people and businesses. It's a municipal lot. The spots aren't dedicated to anyone in particular. They can be a business owner, they can be an employee, they can be a visitor. There's no primary restrictions But one of the things we did discuss at TRC, and we've discussed with the applicant, that there are times during the year where that lot may be closed. And if that lot is closed, they need to function as a hotel. And we asked them to look at other provisions for if that municipal lot was closed, whether it was being resurfaced, whether it was being closed for a event or snow or flood, that they would need to function as a business. And that's when they started to explore off-site facilities. Again, to Mr. Command's point, they first looked at the High Street location, but then when we started to discuss the zoning implications of there, to look at what the uses within those buildings required for parking, I think they discovered that there was not excess spaces that they could use. So the point is you have a large industrial facility that from a zoning perspective, well, I'm just going to use the term, needs 100 spaces. But in a functional standpoint, they only use half of those. But you can't take away from the regulatory requirement of that facility and reappropriate spaces. But fortunately, they owned other properties in the Main Street corridor. So they looked at the zoning implications of the requirements of those businesses and whether they had excess spaces. I think one thing we need to confirm tonight is the zoning classification and requirements. And again, they've testified tonight that based on their calculations, there is excess parking there that could potentially be distributed to the hotel. But we would want to verify that with the zoning department. And again, the plans have evolved from High Street to Main Street, so we haven't had those furthered those conversations with zoning. I think the second aspect that's important is you have a lot of underutilized properties on Main Street that may or may not have existed before revisions in the zoning code. And the fact that a business is underutilized, I think in this scenario, they have shown that if this was a fully functioning furniture store with a higher rate of visitation and employees, and if they looked at the furniture store as it relates to a zoning code, their requirement for parking is substantially higher than the requirement for a hotel. So even though they're asking for relief under the hotel requirements, they are still subsequently lower than if this, we'll do the reverse. If this was a hotel, it would require 12 parking spaces. If they came and asked for a permit to turn it into a furniture store, it would require more than 20. They're going in the other direction. The difference here is the aspect of overnight parking. And I think you have a mix of uses that when there's a high demand for parking on Main Street, that there's a lower demand for parking at the hotel. When there's a higher demand for parking at the hotel, there's a lower demand for parking on Main Street. And there are some shoulder hours, probably between 7 and 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, where those overlap. And there's potentially between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. that there's a little bit of overlap. And that's why planning staff and our department asked them to look at all alternatives off-site. So in the event that those conflicts exist, that they have options. And those options would be the 446 Main Street. So I think without some flexibility, which the zoning code allows in the 50% reduction, and the fact that there's a reduction from the current use, even though it's underutilized, but from a regulatory aspect, that furniture store in its current use requires X number of spaces. The change from furniture store to hotel is a reduction of those demands. So again, they're trying to accommodate this. But again, there needs to be some flexibility along Main Street, otherwise you will potentially stymie the redevelopment of uses within the Main Street footprint. So again, there's flexibility there. Again, there has to be an understanding both on the applicant's side and the planning board's side of what the total venue is for flexibility.
Thanks, Jamie. Again, I think the adaptive reuse is a good one, and I imagine that the planning board was fairly comfortable with the initial idea and location, for the most part, of the off-site parking, until Mr. Evans gave his somewhat pessimistic future scenario view.
I've been here long enough that you know, I'm just being honest and candid and very brutally sometimes, but I don't mean to be realistic about what can happen in business. So businesses can get bought and sold, but I think Jamie gave a very good answer if you reverse it. And we were here with a hotel asking for a furniture store. You'd be making the reverse arguments about the parking, so we think we're downsizing it. And also, it's irrelevant to this in some ways, but going to spend millions of dollars to upgrade this building, so it's going to be a wonderful addition to the town, and it's a boutique hotel. It's not a budget motel, if you know what I mean, so that it's not going to be a rooms that are based on price. It's going to be rooms that are based on comfort, style, size, and location, and 240 square foot hotel rooms are gigantuan in today's world, as you know, when you think about that for a minute. And you're going to be paying a lot of money to stay here, so the $5 for the valet isn't going to matter if you're spending $400 a night in the season to stay there or more. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments from the board before we go to the public hearing? Liz?
The only comment I have is you did mention East Greenwich and the amount of valet parking. I find that a very untenable town scenario. I was there on Saturday morning, actually at 11 o'clock in the morning, and had trouble finding a parking space. And I've been there for dinner, and it's a zoo. It's a very unpleasant situation. You have to park quite far away from the store you want to go to if you're there during the day. If you're there at night, it's just a fiasco. We don't live in New York City, so I don't want to have that type of situation. And I don't want to use that as a standard for what we want here in Wakefield.
It's a very big challenge for you, and I get it. If you're going to get investment, which you're starting to get in Wakefield, you're going to get people. And at least you have a municipal lot. You know, they don't have that in East Greenwich, and the one lot that's a lot is now metered, and you have to pay some crazy amount per half hour to park in it. I forget where it is. So I get that. It's a challenge, and it's your judgment to make.
Anything else from board members at this point in time? Peter, could you just refresh the board's memory with regard to the fact that this is unified development review, and we are acting as a dual board, both planning board and zoning board, and how the issue of hardship and the criteria surrounding that should be evaluated?
Sure. So this is an application for a minor land development project, which is something you ordinarily would consider. But along with that is a request for a parking variance. As was discussed, on site they don't have the number of parking spaces that would ordinarily be required. Now, before the change in the law, the request for the parking variance would go to the zoning board, but under the new law, that's all going to be heard by you in one application. And when you consider the variance application, there's a set of standards that they have to address, and if they satisfactorily address those standards, they're entitled to a variance for parking. So the main standard is that they have to show a hardship. The standard of hardship that's described by statute is that the hardship must amount to more than a mere inconvenience. So it doesn't have to be an incredible hardship, doesn't need to be a whole total loss of economic use of the property. Because this is a dimensional regulation they're looking for a variance from, they need to show that the hardship they would suffer a hardship without a variance that would amount to more than a mere inconvenience. They also have to show a couple of other aspects to the hardship. They need to show that the hardship is a result of a unique characteristic of the lot, which in this case, it's the result of the lot not having enough parking, so I think that is, well, it's your judgment, but I think that's probably met here. The second standard is that it's not a self-created hardship. They didn't do anything to create the lack of parking that they're experiencing. They have to also show that the relief requested is consistent with the overall purposes of zoning and with the comprehensive plan. So if they show those elements, then they would be entitled to the parking variance, which would allow them to move forward with the approval on the minor land development project.
Thanks. Jay?
I hate to complicate the matter, but it just came to me when we are all referencing the project review memo that we wrote and provided you in your packets. This alternative parking scenario came to light more recently than that. We don't have a determination from the zoning official officially about all of this. However, we do know that off-site parking in the manner in which is proposed at 446 Main Street is allowed. So therefore, a parking variance is not necessarily required. And I would look for confirmation for that from the zoning official, because they are accommodating the shortage of parking at an off-site location that's within acceptable proximity to the use.
So the only caveat I'd note on that is that they have proposed the off-site parking, but they've basically said, while these are two spaces under the same ownership, they'll continue to do it. But once the ownership changes, they won't. So I think that's a good offer.
Not permanently
But I
connected.
think you should still consider it as a parking variance, because ultimately it may change hands, and then you'd have to have a variance to move forward without those spots.
Any questions from board members on that?
So if we made a motion, we need to add that as a variance.
Yeah, so that
It would be-
would be incorporated into the draft motion you'd get findings on those variance standards. You'd also get findings on the minor land development standards. So those are findings that you'd have to make, all of those findings to approve it.
So it would also be one motion potentially, rather than in the past, two separate motions? Or does it matter?
Well, I'm not sure that it really matters too much. You know, if you're not going to, if you don't find that they meet any of those, if there's even one standard, I should say, in any motion that you don't think they're going to meet, you should probably address that first, because it will give them a chance to respond, and maybe they will be able to meet it. But whether you take it in two, you take it in one, that's kind of the discretion of the board, as long as you make a finding on each of the findings you need to make.
Thank you. Susan? This is a public hearing. Is there anyone who wishes to speak on this item? Please come up to the mic and state your name for the record.
Hi, Lise Torello. It looks like a really beautiful redevelopment of the building, but I share all of your concerns about the parking. That lot is always full. It varies over the course of the day. I'm sure, you know, which business is using more of it than others. I know the car dealership uses a good portion of the lot that's, you know, closest to the car dealer, and I've been in there, and it seems like a third to a half of the lot sometimes is from the car dealership, and you can circle that lot 4 or 5 times before somebody pulls out and you get a space. The time that you can park on Main Street is limited, and I know that ticketing happens of cars parked on Main Street if you stay too long. All of the businesses along there share spots. And as somebody pointed out, I can't remember who, we have River Fire, we have Oktoberfest. There are times when Main Street's closed, the lot is closed, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of people milling around. It just, I'm not slamming the hotel redevelopment. I think it's a really beautiful looking plan, but I think it's time to really revisit, from a higher altitude perspective, how do we long-term look at the parking situation on Main Street and for the other businesses? Because this is a problem that's going to get worse and not better. And I don't know from a more, village planning standpoint, whether there's a bigger picture approach to this that would work for the public and all of these businesses who want to grow and thrive. And, we love Main Street. We all love Main Street. We all love to be there. So how do we make it easier for everybody? So, thank you.
Thanks. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak?
Hello, I'm Winfield Swanson. I just came in out of curiosity. I'm going to be a little provocative and say I think everyone's worrying about parking a bit too much. Main Street is on a bus line. It's hourly. It goes between Kingston Station, URI, and the Block Island Ferry. And there are movements to try and make it better than hourly frequency. If part of the I can't think of a better word, the constituency for the hotel is parents visiting for their kids' graduation at URI. You come in by train, take the bus and stay there. It seems like in that case, parking wouldn't be a consideration, and so I think it should be approved as it stands, and it's all interconnected. And that if it is a big problem, the town can always look at introducing metering if congestion becomes insoluble otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Deborah Wetman. I live on Kenyon Avenue, practically within earshot or eyeshot of Main Street and the Sheldons. I think we would be remiss if we didn't approve this. Parking has always been an issue. It is a long-term solution that the town has to come up with. Every business is affected by it, but we would really be missing out if we didn't take this gem of a building on Main Street and make it what is planned to be. Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess I wonder, we have Wakefield School.
Oh, could you just state your name first?
Renee Lamontagne. We have Wakefield School space that's being completely not utilized, and why couldn't the town benefit with some sort of profit or proceed from the owner of the proposed hotel so that we could utilize some of the space there? I don't know about proximity and what the legal proximity has to be, short of maybe the valet using a skateboard or something like that. But it seems like we've got a lot of empty spaces in town that the town owns that we're not benefiting from. And so the proximity doesn't seem to be that much far off from the previous High Street proposal of extra parking. And if we're only looking for 7 spaces, it seems like that might be very possible. There are certainly 7 spaces there. And it's right across the bridge. We don't have to go all the way around on the road.
Thank you.
Hi. My name's Wayne Kuhn, and I hang around Main Street a little bit. I own a piece of land on Main Street where the big yellow building stands on Robinson, and then Brickley's and Purse Lane and the candy store, the ice cream store, right down to the kitchen store. That's all my property. And I got parking in the back. I'm one of the only landowners that has property for parking. I love Wakefield. I think that this opportunity is going to be a boom for businesses downtown. Wakefield can be a pretty desolate town. I remember back in the 90s, prior to owning the property in which I purchased in 1999, you could roll a ball down Main Street and not hit anybody. Everything, Kenyon's was closed. Sheldon's has been hanging on, but it's time. And I think you people talk about parking. Well, all of the buildings on the right-hand side from the lumber yard down to the car dealership, none of them have any parking to speak of. It's all town parking. So, I don't know what the point I'm trying to make on that one, but again, I just think that there's ways to make this happen. And not to begrudge anyone, but that car dealership downtown, those cars are there for weeks at a time, and they don't move. Wakefield is unique. Parking is crucial to Wakefield. If Wakefield was all office buildings and people driving into town, parking their car for 8 hours a day, and that lot and that spot doesn't open back up again, it kills retail. Those spots that come and go are what you want. Brickley's Ice Cream changed Wakefield when they came. Their lot that the business comes, I had people complain that there was too many people downtown. And I don't know what to say. But when you have a mesh of businesses that people come and go, that's important. What they're trying to do is bring people that are going to be here at night where it's much quieter on Main Street because of places like Brickley's, places like Purse Lane, the restaurants that are coming in. They work. And you look down Main Street, and Sheldon's is a tired building. The Sheldon family has been stewards in the community. But it's time. And I would hate to see that building get torn down. When I bought my block, most of the town thought I was crazy. I had one banker tell me, the only way we'll give you money on this property is if you tear everything down. I'm not tearing it down. Don't have them tear Sheldon's down. You can find a way to get the parking. The school lot can enhance parking. You know, every time you have an event downtown, you think, where are all these people coming from? Where did they park? They find a way. So, I hope that you give this some good consideration, and I'd like to have a new neighbor. And I think that they're going to be far and away a big boom for Wakefield. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Jamie, before we discuss a motion to close the public hearing, is there anything else from staff on this, seeing as the revisions were not received until recently?
I think a couple of things I'll make comments on and then defer to council for guidance and advice. One thing I mentioned earlier, we would like to solidify the interpretation that the applicant put forward this evening with regards to compliance with parking at 446 and the Muse and their ability to have access parking there, not on a utilization basis, but on a regulatory basis. And I'm relatively confident that that can be done quickly with a consultation with Jamie Gorman. And again, both Mr. Evans and Mr. Camus tonight stated that their own evaluation says that there is excess parking and they're confident in that. Again, we like to seek verification from zoning on that. The second aspect is clarification from the applicant on their statements tonight about the retail, non-hotel space, that 600 square feet. In their waiver request, they're contemplating that as hotel use only because they didn't do a separate calculation on that. I believe my conversations with the applicant have been that it is their intent at this time to have it dedicated as hotel space, and that if it was to be converted in the future, they were to a bistro coffee shop, they'd be back before the planning board to address that scenario. That would make the parking scenario less complicated at this time, and then there'd be a track record as time moved on. If there was, again, if they were approached where someone said, you know, you got this great space, let me lease it from you, and then they would cross that bridge at that point in time. So again, those are two final issues associated with the application. You have revised architecturals. I think the planning board seemed to be much more pleased with the renderings that were submitted very recently to us. And again, I would like to commend the applicant for making those revisions relatively quickly from their initial submission based on staff's feedback and anticipation of some of the feedback from planning board members. But again, I'd like to solidify those. On the regulatory side, Ms. Mack brought up the question of 2 motions versus 1 motion. We would work with council to solidify that a little bit more and potentially pull the motions apart so that it's clear on what you're voting on, the waiver request and relief. And then if you vote for those, in essence, you're in all likelihood in favor of the motion to approve the development. So again, we'll work with council on potentially pulling that apart. I guess, and we'll also clarify the completeness status of the application, so that's clear. I guess the question I have for council, both our legal counsel as well as the applicant's counsel, is whether you feel we're in a place to close the public hearing because we have sufficient information to respond to the application and submission material, or whether you feel there's a need to keep the hearing open in case the applicant is submitting any substantial information associated with their application. I'd like our legal counsel to weigh in on that first.
I think you can close the public hearing. My take on this, particularly with the off-site parking, is that I just look at this as a parking variance for the parking on-site, particularly since there's not going to be some type of parking easement that restricts that parking in perpetuity to the off-site use. So I would just look at this as a request to change use. It's slightly less non-conforming as to parking, and so now they're asking for a parking variance for the 7 spaces that they would have needed to be conforming for this use. And unless there's any other use that comes in later, it can be dealt with later, but as of, for now, you could close the public hearing and make a decision on that.
Thanks, Peter. And do you feel that the applicant has given us sufficient information with regard to issues of hardship and the other zoning criteria that you mentioned earlier?
So I can give you my opinion on it. Obviously, it's your job to judge.
Right.
My opinion is that they have, this is a pretty straightforward variance application because clearly the parking is a feature of the land. It's not some feature that was created by the applicant. It's always been an issue with the land in this area. And as far as the hardship amounting to more than mere inconvenience, which is the other main issue, it's hard to see how it wouldn't, because without a parking variance, they can't have the use, which otherwise would be permitted. So to me, this is a very simple variance request that they've submitted enough evidence on.
Thanks. Mr. Evans?
I concur with everything your solicitor said, Madam Chair. Just now in response to Jamie's question, I also concur with what he advised you in terms of what the legal standards are, and without, and it's obvious that we meet all of those standards since we're proposing a use that requires less relief than the existing use does if we were going to continue it. So that's like easy peasy to me on a legal issue. And just to circle back when I said it wasn't, in stone for the alternate piece, if business owners, just like homeowners, buy and sell properties sometimes during their lives, but if some parcel we were using for the extra parking to make it more convenient for guests became unavailable, we'd find another one for the reasons that Mike from Main Street explained so eloquently. This is a home run for the town. Somebody's going to come in and spend millions of dollars and build a boutique hotel in Wakefield with 20 rooms. It's like a Grand Slam home run. And it's going to encourage other people to do what Mike did 25 years ago, and I never met Mike until tonight, although I may file an adoption petition in the probate court tomorrow. But I mean, he explained the courage you have to have, the financial commitment you have to make, and the stick-to-itiveness you have to come into a village like this and do something which is against the grain. And he did that, I think he said 1999. Look how long it took him for the thing to turn around and Wakefield to start to become more alive again. And this is going to be a huge part of that. And for space this small to attract what's going to be millions of dollars in investment. I think it's wonderful for anyone. So I don't think we need to really verify what the other parking is, because it's not part of the application anyway. But the owner's always going to have to find a way to park their cars to make the hotel work, and they will. And whether Wakefield School someday becomes a parking lot, I don't know. But we thank you for your consideration and your attention, and we don't think the public hearing needs to remain open unless you decide differently, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always good to hear that there's legal agreement. Would someone like to make a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
We have a motion from Joe. Do we have a second? Second from Liz. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. So, Jamie, we will leave it up to you then, provided there's consensus amongst board members, to get the validation from the zoning enforcement officer, to, what was your other thing?
So, discussion with zoning with
Right.
regards to the calculation associated with the uses of the off-site parking to support the waiver request. Again, understanding it's not a lease scenario, to the testimony received from the applicant as well as our legal counsel. The second item was to look at whether we pull the motion apart, and motion 1 and motion 2, motion 1 being the variance, motion 2 would be the motion on the actual use of the building and the permitting of the site plan and architecturals associated with that. And again, we'll discuss that in council, and we may even give you 2 options. We'll do a pull apart, and then we'll do a combined. And then this third aspect to that was solidifying the status of completeness. I want to say that the supplement information that has been submitted would put us in a complete mode with relationship to the application submission materials. So again, we'll just dot our i's and cross our t's and refine the draft motion that we had put before you in our project memo for consideration tonight. Is there any, I guess I would ask the planning board members, you had our draft motion
That was gonna be
and
my
having
next
an
question.
opportunity to look at that. Is there anything you feel we need to dive a little deeper on, modify language, or include clarification on?
Anything? No? No. And you would be able to have this completed by our next regular meeting, yes?
We could do by regular meeting, or again, if we can button up some things, we could contemplate having it at just the motion at the work session.
Okay.
So we'll do our best to move this through the process.
So would someone like to make a motion for staff to draft an approval with necessary steps as suggested this evening for either our next work session, which is in 2 weeks, or our next regular meeting?
I can do that.
Motion from Susan. Do we have a second?
So I'll make the motion, but I'll also say, can't speak for everyone, but I think this is a great project, and this is a really good thing for our downtown. And your restoration of the exterior of the building and finding a good reuse for it is really good for our town. So thank you.
Agreed. Any further discussion? How about a second on the motion? All those in favor say aye. 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 Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Is that March 11th, is that 2-week date?
What was that?
Is that March 11th, Madam Chair, the 2-week date that comes out? You said it was 2 weeks before.
Our work session is 2 weeks, yes. March 11th.
Thank you
Yes.
so much. I just wanted to make sure I had it on my calendar, so I would be here. Thank you so much.
Very good, thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Our next agenda item is a public hearing, major land development, preliminary plan, flexible design, residential project, village at Broad Rock.
Hello, Chair Mack, members of the board. Thank you for your time tonight. James Callahan of Callahan & Callahan, 3 Brown Street in Wickford. Here on behalf of Stephen Clark, who's here tonight, of New England Properties LLC, the applicant. We also have Tim Bean from Commonwealth and John Carter from John Carter & Co. for landscaping. The proposal tonight is the Village at Broad Rock, which you're, I think, well aware of. We're here for a preliminary plan stage. This site includes 16.5 acres. It's on the west side of Broad Rock Road. Steve and his family have owned the property for decades. This is a flexible design residential plan pursuant to your subdivision regulations. We were here before you last June, which now feels like a generation ago, but we did receive master plan approval, and since then, we've updated the master plan based on your decision. We've been to TRC. Tim has received comments from the planning department and provided updated responses. We have the staff report as well. It's very comprehensive. We appreciate the work on that, and it lays out the project in great detail. This is part of the new state laws effective January 1st, 2024. It's an R40 zone. Based on the square footage, the yield plan would reveal 13 lots. We've proposed 3 affordable lots, which are lots 6, 11, and 18 on your plans. And in turn, this allows for a total of 19 units. At master plan, we did not request any waivers. I did submit a waiver request for condition 12 of the master plan because it references a comp permit letter of eligibility, and this is not a comp permit plan, so I just wanted to make that clear. But regardless, we are not asking for any other waivers for buffers, open space, or drainage, no other variances. We believe this project meets all the requirements of the FDRP, and in the end, we think this is going to be a pleasant private street providing affordable and market rate units close to downtown Wakefield, the junior high school, the rec center, and the YMCA, among many other places, including Old Mountain Field. So we think it'll be a great addition to the town and an attractive development for new neighbors. And overall, we believe the staff report raises no significant issues that we can't address or haven't addressed. And with that, I'd ask Tim Bean to approach. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. For the record, Timothy Behan, professional engineer with the firm Commonwealth Engineers and Consultants in Providence, Rhode Island. I'd like to just run through the existing plan and the proposed plan, just to get everybody up to speed again. Yeah, I can work with that. That's fine. This is the existing site. You can see Broad Rock Road is on the right side of the plan going up and down. We have what Wood Mist Circle, a recent subdivision just to the south of the site, below the subject site. The property is 16.5 acres in size. The colored blue and green areas is the Saugatuck River. The green represents the wetlands and the river, and the blue represents the associated 100-year floodplain. The wetland does have buffers extending beyond the wetland there and the stream. There's a 200-foot setback and a associated 20-foot structure setback off of that. The subject site is already partially developed with an existing house, a metal-type garage structure, a little road-type driveway cul-de-sac area for a turnaround, and some gardens spread out throughout the lot. For the proposed condition, there we go. There's the proposed condition. You can see the proposed road. It's a private road. and that's approximately 1,241 feet long, ends in a cul-de-sac, provides access to 19 proposed lots. Those lot lines are the same lot lines you saw at master plan. We didn't change any of them. So each one of those lots, as we said, will have single-family homes on them. Since master plan, we have completed the design and submitted applications for the public water system. We've received a permit from them. We've also submitted to DEM Wetlands for the associated work near the buffer line and the stormwater system. And they also approved and reviewed the soil and erosion control management plan, which is called RIPES permit in Rhode Island. All those permits should be in your packets. What else? We have public water. We have septic out there. We've coordinated and received a subdivision suitability report from the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, their OWTS section for the proposed septic systems. The drainage system is the same as the concept design. We have one side of the road is an area for a swale to encourage infiltration prior to discharging into the infiltration/detention pond. And that pond is still situated in the same spot as master plan in the lower left corner, where that would fill up during larger storm events and flow back to the Saugatuck River at rates which are less than or existing than preconditions, and all those stormwater requirements and calculations were reviewed by the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management in their permit process. We do have, what else do we have out there? We have open space. If you look closely around the perimeter of the entire development between the proposed lots and the existing lot line, there is a minimum of 50 feet of open space. So that will remain as a nice buffer between the two developments. Other than that, it's a pretty straightforward job. It's been reviewed by the town. We've had some comments go back and forth, and we're at a point we believe we've addressed them all, and we're here for any additional comments the board or the public may have.
Thank you. Before we begin, Mark, are there any concerns or comments from DPS on this?
I believe we addressed or gone over most of the comments we've already had before. They were successful. We're satisfied with the response to our comments. I did have one additional comment in reviewing the operation and maintenance plan. I'm looking for some sort of reference to that maintenance plan, whether it be in the association documents or on the site plan, so that the stormwater BMPs do get maintained and maintained properly.
We do have a 8.5 by 11 operation and maintenance plan that can be recorded in land evidence records, or we can just maybe create another sheet in the plan set and just kind of put it on a plan sheet. Either way, we've done it both ways.
Yeah, that would be fine by me.
Thank you. Question on your detention basin, and I know you're not here to talk about landscaping per se, and I believe there is some landscaping associated with it, is the rectangular area on the northwest portion of that, is that riprap?
The northwest, yes. That kind of darker area, yes, that would be the riprap spillway going towards the Saugatuck River. So when it fills up, the water would go over that area.
And are there any alternative effective means by which you can still have the same effect without having a less of a industrial kind of look? We don't often see riprap in residential design so much.
Well, maybe we could sit down with Mr. Conboy and come up with a detail of something else.
I imagine that the people that live in that subdivision will venture out into that area.
Okay.
Comments, questions from board members? Liz?
Has a traffic study been done?
Yes, the traffic study was done, and that was testified at master plan.
Okay. Because I see it's noted in here. I'm sorry, I don't
Okay.
recall what the traffic, could you just summarize what the traffic study indicated?
I'm not the traffic engineer. There was a separate consultant that did testify at the master plan hearing for the traffic study, and there is written traffic report associated with this project.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Joe?
So, Mr. Carter, I like your project, your design. What I like about it is the open space around the perimeter, so it makes a really nice buffer. I like the open space next to the street, so it blocks off some of the subdivision. And I like the fact that you realigned the stone walls. I think that that'll clarify some property disputes and as well as make the lots look more appeasing. In one of the previous meetings, maybe the last meeting we had, they asked for you to spend a little more time explaining to us what the entrance would look like as an elevation view from somebody sitting in a vehicle on Broad Rock. So where I'm coming from there is this town is growing, it'll continue to grow. We have to figure out, as we have more and more subdivisions, we have to figure out how do we stay looking like rural South Kingstown and not like Warwick. And I think a big part of that is making sure we kind of understate the entrances so that when you're driving down the road, you don't see a subdivision. Instead, you kind of see a winding road that kind of goes off that could be a single family or it could be a subdivision. And I'm not sure that, as much as I like everything else, I'm not sure that that part was addressed. So maybe if you could tell us a little more about that. Okay.
That's a really good question. I think maybe we should wait until John comes up to discuss landscaping and just ensure that no one else has questions relating to engineering first, since Mr. Bean is devoting. Any questions relating to layout, engineering, that sort of thing from board members at this point? Nope.
Just looking at the open space, is it safe to assume that that is a continuous avenue for wildlife to get to the water, or are there any impediments that segment that open space buffer?
I'm not aware of anything. I believe there's a stone wall section in the north end, but the stone walls aren't very tall.
Thank you.
All right.
If there's no other questions for engineering, let's move on to landscaping.
Thank you. For the record, John Carter. I'm a registered landscape architect. My office is 960 Boston Neck Road, Narragansett. I'll get right to the entrance question that Joe asked. We actually have a rendering. I don't know if the staff has it. Then they do. And we did good. I for some reason thought we forgot to send it. But, so that's the rendering. So the landscape along Broad Rock Road, presently there's a stone wall to the north side of the, well, let me back up. The existing entrance is going to be closed off. The driveway is going to be revegetated, and we're going to do some planting along that southerly property line as we presented before, and that was really in response to the people who live there, and they asked, and we said we would do that. Then there's going to be stones available from the site that are going to be taken down as the site's cleared and developed. And we've got a variety of locations where we've shown to those to be used. So this is the proposed entrance. On the left, there's going to be a short segment of wall constructed. I don't believe it's there now. To the right, on the north side, there's an existing wall And this is similar to what it looks like, except it's pretty overgrown at the moment. And it extends about 3/4 of the way up to the north. And our intent is to rebuild this wall using stones from on the site, and then continue or go all the way to the northerly property line. So the Broad Rock Road streetscape will basically be the wall that's there now, only in a lot better condition, with nothing between it and the asphalt except the natural vegetation that's there. There's not much there. It's kind of typical roadside stuff. There's some ferns and some kind of invasive stuff. I would imagine the homeowners will probably mow that shoulder. And then the view into the site, the road does come in and then curve to the right. There is 100 feet of open space between the road edge and the first house lot. There is not a house immediately on the left as you go in. There you go. That's actually like, that house is going to be like, we have stations on the road, let me see. So like 300 feet approximately in from Broad Rock Road. And then we have, to further enhance that, we've got plantings. I don't know if you want to, if you don't mind. Yeah, put my landscape plan up, that might help. If you can just go to the first one, maybe. Yeah, there you go, thank you. So, as you enter the site, to the right, to the north side, there's a pullout, and there's going to be the mailboxes there, the community mailboxes, because it's a private road. And to the left, there's that little sort of crosshatched rectangle. That's a water hot box, they call it. And that comes to us from the water company, I guess, the location. We have planting. We're going to plant around it. We can't completely hide it, but we can screen it. And then we have the trees that you see with the, there's a tree protection fence around them. And there's one that's an oak, and then, thank you with the arrow there. And then you go into the site, there's a big white pine and a big beech. Oh yeah, there's a beech there. Presently, when you go into the site, those are on your right because the driveway is running along that stone wall, but it's going to be switched to be up on the north side of them. So those are all proposed to stay. And then we've got white pines proposed along the southerly property line, as I said, in response to the neighbors that live down there. There's also a big oak on the north side of the new entrance that we're proposing to protect and leave also. And those are actually the only significant big trees out there. I don't know if you've been on the property, but it's primarily cleared and disturbed and used by the residents. So I can go into the site, but I know, Joe, you asked about the entrance.
Is it possible to perhaps get a little more vegetation or another tree or so just to the side of of House 1, between that and the street, such that when you're at the entranceway, you have more of a blocked view of House 1? It looks like there's very, very scarce trees right there.
The what?
It looks very scarce on the side of House 1.
It is. That's been cleared. I don't know. It looks like once upon a time it may have been gravelled, dug out, and gravel came out, and we absolutely can fill in that. Yeah.
Just so you don't necessarily see that
To fill that,
itself.
it's going to be left to revegetate because it is part of the dedicated open space. But before it screens the road, I'll probably be dead. So
you could do some screening.
We can put some plantings in.
I think that's a very good idea, particularly because your entrance trees and the one on that particular side is deciduous in nature, so it would be nice to have a little something else. Can you just explain the dimensions of the hot box that you referred to?
Can I pass that to Tim?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, the hot box is, we have 2 hydrants in the development, so it's 8-inch pipe coming in, and it has to go through a backflow preventer and meter. So I would estimate they're probably about 5 feet wide and good 10 to 12 feet long.
How tall are they?
They're probably 4 or 5 feet high.
Okay, thank you. So, and I noticed, I saw that, and I wasn't familiar with what the dimensions of that would be, and I think you have some grasses and some low-growing juniper. Just wondering if, not that you're going to make it invisible, but if the plantings could just be a little bit more robust adjacent to it.
We could also extend we're proposing a white rail fence to come in on both sides of the entrance, and you can see in that drawing on the screen that it stops right before the hot
Yes.
box. We could extend it in front of it.
That's a
and
good
Put
idea.
some plantings along
Yep.
that, too.
That's a great idea.
You've probably driven by those things and not seen them. They're, the price of getting water into a new development. Okay. Okay. So that was Steve Clark. He just said that he doesn't know if we can put the fence directly in front of it, but I believe we can bring it up on each side of it and infill with plants. But yes, the water company needs to be able to walk up to the doors on the front of it.
There's also water lines servicing that right in front, so that might limit the opportunity to do large type screening. I think we can leave that to John to figure out.
Right.
We'll do
that-
something.
yeah.
I know what you're asking for.
Great. Other thoughts, comments from board members?
I have a couple.
Go ahead, Susan.
So I have a question, and I'm not sure if it's for you or for the engineer, but I'm on Plan 4, and on the buffer zones, it specifically says, work in buffer zone, open space area, remove only trees necessary to install or perform work specified. Can you tell me what work is being specified in those buffer zones that would be potentially taking trees down?
We're doing some stone wall work. It's on sheet, I believe, 9, shows the existing stone walls and where they're going to and from. So clearly, some of the, whatever machine they use, backhoe, Bobcat, needs to work in those areas. What else do we have?
So before you move on from that, I very much appreciate that you are reusing the stones for stone walls.
Yeah.
But if you're taking down mature trees to follow the lines on the plans, I think I would maybe count that as a net loss. Where could
I
you
fully
know,
agree.
taking down trees to put a stone wall up seems counter to what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So I don't know what other work is planned in the buffer zones, but I would hope that your last choice is to take down any trees from that buffer zone.
Well, some of the walls are on the other side of the buffer zone. Like we're replacing or getting to walls that are along the perimeter of the property.
Okay, so,
We would be adding stones to those.
Yeah.
so along the southern edge, right where the property line is, there's a stone wall now.
Yeah.
And it's in the final plans also.
Correct.
So you're not leaving them in their state they're in now, you're planning to change them in some way that you would
Well,
need to
the
get
stone
equipment in?
wall is, some areas not high enough, so we're going to supplement it. A lot of the
Okay.
stone walls out there aren't very high.
Right,
We're being mandated or asked to, all the stone walls that come down is a result of the clearing, because the site's gonna be cleared for development, not in the buffer zones, just the developable area.
yeah.
We have to reuse those stones, and we've proposed some new walls, and Joe pointed that out. We've tried to align them on property lines and so
Yep.
forth. But with the abundance of stones, we're gonna find homes for them, and we're proposing, as Tim said, the areas where the walls are insufficient, we'll
Yep.
put the stones on those. I don't know that we need to take trees down.
Can I ask a question?
My name is
Yeah, just speak into the mic, please.
My name is Stephen Clark, and we are not going to take down any trees to move and rebuild stone walls. We will work around those trees that were necessary to build the stone walls.
Thank you. That's the goodest answer. That's a great answer. So I think that was my question for engineering, but I also have some questions for Mr. Carter about landscaping. I haven't gotten out a tape measure, are your proposed stone walls equal in linear length to the stone
Yes.
walls that are being removed?
Yes,
So it's an equal exchange?
yes. Tim
Uh-oh.
calculated the linear footage and.
Hold on.
Just one other thing.
Or maybe
It
not.
greatly,
Just restate your name.
once again, Stephen Clark, the amount of walls that we are proposing greatly exceeds the amount of walls that we are coming down, because a lot of the existing walls are maybe just 1 stone high, and we're proposing to, I think, almost 900 feet of walls, and I think there's just around 780 feet of existing stone walls of all different heights, and we're proposing 900 feet of walls, all at the 3-foot height. So we greatly exceed what's out there.
Wow, that's
That's
two
really
good.
good.
It's 2 good answers in a row. Thank
Yeah.
you. Okay, so you had just stated that a good amount of the site has already been cleared for agriculture or gardens. Are there mature trees on this site that can be saved, or will this site be essentially clear-cut wherever houses are going in?
There are mature trees, and I identified them, and most of them are at the entrance, and the new entrance has been relocated, and those big trees at the entrance will stay. Inside the proposed limit of work, there's nothing, I mean, I did a site visit with the intent of inventorying the trees. I do that on all the projects I work on, and there is no, what I would term a significant tree out there. There's a couple of big white pines in areas, but this type of development where it's clustering all the houses and leaving all that open space, which exceeds even the requirement, the byproduct of that is it's very difficult to work around trees. But have you been on the site?
I did. I actually did. I worked for the United States Census in 2020, and I took census in that
And you
house.
walked out, they sent you down that driveway?
It was beautiful up there.
Okay, so there's a house in there and an old sort of, I hate to use the word barn because people get nervous, some old outbuilding. There's driveways, it's residential activity, so it's pretty much all utilized. It's driven on, it's mowed, there's gardens, so the FDRP, the whole foundation of it is to sort of identify the areas to be preserved and then identify the areas to be developed and put the development in those areas. And that fits perfectly in this scenario.
I agree with that logic of the FDRP, but we've also had projects here in town where every piece of the landscaping has been removed, and there are little spindly saplings planted, and it really is sort of a shame, because it'll take a generation to become
Yeah, I don't know about a
attractive
generation. If you go to South County Hills, down off Route 1, you're familiar with? I remember that was a gravel pit.
Right.
And the trees in there, the street trees are prospering, and they're big, and they're mature, and it's nice to see. But so yeah, that is the process.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe just to add to what Susan was talking about with regard to tree size and maturity and length of time to maturity, perhaps the deciduous trees that you're planting at the entrance could be substantial enough in size so that it's not going to be 10, 15 years till it looks like the lovely photo or image.
The proposal is to put, at this point, is to put
evergreens along the south property line, white pines, which are fast growers
Yes.
and big growers, up to the north where we just discussed, where that's cleared. I was thinking we could do a mix of deciduous, but evergreen also.
That's a good
Even
idea.
though, the evergreen palette is down to nothing at this point, but with the deer and then the spruce tree, blight and all that stuff, and I know everybody dreads those, the Thuya plicata, but I gotta tell you, man, that's a good tree. It's a fast-growing, healthy, deer-resistant, and they grow, so I may put some in there.
Yeah, if they're mixed with other conifers, I think what is objectionable often is that row of straight arborvitae that we see.
Yeah.
But
Maria,
again, I think having the mix of the conifers
I
and the
understand
deciduous
what
is-
you're asking, and
Yep.
absolutely can get that
Great.
for you.
Thank you.
Maria,
Susan?
just for clarification on Susan Axelrod's question, and Ms. Carter's at the podium, so I'll ask it. I just wanted there to be a clear understanding, because I think Susan was asking, similar to another development, in order to accommodate the grading for lots 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, there's substantial regrading associated with that in the plan you have before the planning board. So just so understanding, when they're grading and moving contours 2+ feet, that in some instances, the areas associated with those lots are clear cut. So I don't want, I think Mr. Carter answered the question well. It's just, some of the planning board members sometimes look at a site, look at it landscape, and then go in and don't realize that in order to accommodate grading, storm drainage, in a slight
Septic.
manipulation of the micro-topography that exists within these lots, that there is a good interior portion of this parcel that will be clear cut. Okay. Similar to the project you're referencing.
Thank you. But it's nice if there's any vegetation, clumps of cedar or anything else, even if it's not a mature tree, that can be preserved to maintain this landscape. That would be really good.
Yes, and there's an economic driver to that, too. I mean, this site where it's going to be developed does not have any big significant trees, but it costs money, and developers, if they can leave a tree, whether they do it out of their goodness of their heart or just because they don't want to pay to take it down, they typically will leave it. But these houses on this plan are footprints, proposed footprints of homes that are going to be shaped differently, maybe slid back or forward a little bit, twisted a little bit, and that type of thing. And it gives, each lot's individual and there's some flexibility. But as Jamie said, if there's grading to be done, and when you look at this plan, most of it is covered with house, driveway, septic system, and stormwater. So most of it's going to have to be clear to accommodate all that.
I could ask one more question before I leave you alone. The stormwater basin in the corner there, is that lawn around and then it's going to be regularly mowed, or do you have any natives going in or wildflowers, or what's your plan for that stormwater structure?
The bottom and the sides of the basin, there's a seed mix specced out, and that's got to be acceptable to DEM. But it's basically a native, or maybe more of it's a seed mix that's hardy and will survive without any care. It gets mowed periodically, not on a regular basis. And the intent of mowing it is to keep the woody plants, trees, and things from growing in there. And other than that, it just looks like an overgrown field. And again, you've probably driven by a lot of those and seen them, and that's what they look like.
And just to reiterate your earlier point, it is much more difficult when you're dealing with cut and fill within the limit of disturbance. And as Jamie tactfully put it, manipulation of micro-topography, but...
I kind of like that.
Yeah.
But just to point out, we've met all the required and exceeded all the required buffer setbacks. So there's 50 feet on the south, 50 feet on the north, and 100 feet on Broad Rock, and 200-plus feet to the west associated with a river. And that's all property that cannot be disturbed during construction or in the future.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions from board members? This is a public hearing. If you would like to speak, please come up to the mic and state your name for the record.
Good evening. My name is David Webster. My wife and I, Marilyn, own and reside in the property to the north. First of all, I'd like to say that I looked at the open space easement and covenant, and I was glad to see in there that a previous comment about some of the uses of the open space were addressed. Primarily, I'm talking about number 7, where it talks about all motorized vehicles being restricted. That's something that it asked for, and that's been addressed, so that's good to see. Going on about the open space, I'm looking at the project review memo of February 25, and number 25 says the applicant shall depict a plan to provide appropriate monumentation of the open space associated with the proposed development, that is granite bounds, grant bounds, whatever that may be, landscape boulders, in consultation with DPS. When I looked at the plan, what I was shown was that there were some 4x4 posts going to delineate the open space, and I recall some discussion at the previous meeting where there was talk of using some landscape boulders, as is mentioned in number 25, and I would hope that this landscape buffer would, or this open space rather, would be lined with those boulders rather than just posts. Certainly it's a lot easier to move a post than it is to go in and move a lot of landscape boulders along an open space. And the other thing that I noted is there's, in the relocation of the walls that are going to be removed within the site and then rebuilt in other locations. Part of that, one of those wall relocations is along my property line, and I just would like to see some kind of a note added to the plan that, because there are fence lines along there that I'd like to see preserved, as well as some plantings that I've made on my side in hopes that someday they'll grow up and serve as screening. So if we could add some kind of notation there to take caution during the construction so that those are not disturbed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carolyn Griswold, I'm in a butter on the southwest line. So we've been talking about stone walls, and because the map that I have doesn't quite look like what I see up there, so I have a few questions. I had talked last time about having my stone wall border completed. There are several, I had horses at one time, they're gone, but there were some open places in the stone walls which I had rebuilt early on, but there were places where there were openings and I couldn't, I didn't have enough stone. So I can't tell from the dark line along the property line whether you were going to, I had spoken to Mr. Clark about it.
Yes, Stephen Clark, if you don't mind, I can address that.
Sure.
We will, in the area on the southern boundary,
Right.
we will rebuild those areas of stone walls that
Yeah, they're
are
further down, way further down.
But Going down, further down. Oh, I'm sorry. Going further down along towards the westerly side, that enters the DEM buffer zone. And for us to bring tractors and whatnot to rebuild the stone wall, we wouldn't get approval by DEM. We will rebuild outside of the DEM buffer as we see fit.
Well, most of those walls are okay, but I think they're probably more up in here.
Yes.
All right.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. And the map that I have indicates a service access road, and I'm not really sure what that is. It shows it way down by the retaining pond.
For the record, Timothy Behan. The service access road is this short road right here, see it?
Okay, well, it doesn't really point.
That's for a vehicle to pull in to maintain the detention pond. Say if they wanted to cut the grass or something, they can park their vehicle there.
Okay.
That's,
All right, and there's a pet waste station there as well. That's going to be located somewhere up there.
up at the corner of the road up there. See that?
Okay. Well, it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. And I'd also be very interested in having some plantings along my southern border, that southern border, to block anything that's, would be obtrusive, especially in the part between the Wood Mist Circle boundary and my more western part. That's it.
How you doing, Madam Chair and the board? My name is Ryan Caniset. I moved into 35 Wood Mist Circle, which is on the south end property. If you're looking at the lots 16, 17, 18, and 19, I know that I moved in Columbus Day weekend, and I know that there's been some other meetings that we've had. We've talked about vegetation and such to the entranceway, and the road was shifted north, and some conifer trees were put behind the first lot of Wood Mist Circle. I have two concerns. One might be on the side of engineering. If you're aware of that Wood Mist property, I'm at 35. I think it says Sawyer Trust, which that's the house that I bought. But there is a retaining pond already that exists there, and there are swales. There are two ponds in the back. One would be, I'm hoping that the ponds would be maintained with some sort of association that's involved in the development. For example, the bigger pond behind my house where it says abutting open, it's able to be mowed. So as the association, we mow that a couple times a year. So my concern would be mosquitoes and those types of things at the wet times. At this time of the year, when the ground is frozen, it gets pretty substantially deep. So my concern would be, from an engineering perspective, would be with the road and the swale, how I'm hoping that the engineering would be pushing that water in the, I would assume, the clear cut area that's going to go into that basin in the back, where it does go downhill a little bit in the back. So I would hate to see that is going to overflow into the existing pond that's in the area behind my house at 35 Wood Mist. So that's the engineering question that I have. And then the second would be in regards to the open space. I know that Ms. that spoke earlier lives behind my property, and if you look at what the builders might have done, I think it was DeBlois, I'm not sure who the builder was to put in that area, but along the retaining pond there are a series of pine trees that they put. So I don't even see her house. I see the fence that's back there. I see one of the fence posts, vertical post, horizontal, that's broken. I know exactly the stone wall. So that's where I'm thinking of the due diligence of a site that you could put in some more of coniferous type white pine trees that grow for that area. So my concern is, I'm a Rhode Islander, born and raised in Situate, Rhode Island, so I grew up on 3 acres. I had a house in Richmond, I lived in North Kingstown, and aesthetically, you want to keep the nature of the countryside. So my other concern is on that northern side, so there's 2 proposed walls, and then there's a wall that exists there, and there's a perpendicular, I think 16, 17, 18, and I kind of just walked it the other day and looked around, and the concerns that I have is that it looks like there's a lot of oak tree right in that area. If you look up at some of the branches, there are a lot of dead limbs up there, so my concern is the ability of those oak trees to stay for a long period of time. So in other words, there's a lot of scrub that's fallen down. You're also dealing with that invasive vine that's all going through that area as well. And when you pace out the 50 feet buffer, even I kind of walked out, and I'm not sure if our line is exactly that southern wall, if you want to call it, because there'll be another wall that goes in north of that, correct? About parallel to that they're putting in there. It seems like I just paced it. It seems like on lot 16 over there that it's like there's a LOD, and I'm not sure if that's the corner of a lot, but it seems like it's about 40 feet off of the wall versus 50 feet. So I didn't know if the wall is off, or I'm not an expert in that regards. But my concern is those walls, like that perpendicular wall that's theirs, might be removed a little bit. And if you get some of the bulldozers in there, the existing roots might deteriorate. I know that my friend used to be the town engineer in SK a while back, and I know the soil can be tough, the roots can be tough. When you start taking down, I would hate to see some of those trees fall. So all I'm asking is maybe the arborists or someone can look in the types of trees that are in there, and if need be, we can put some white pine type plantings either on the edge of that property line. And we talked about, the stone wall that they're going to be building there can kind of circumvent or keep the natural beauties of trees that are already existing, not taking those down. But I really think for the type of house, if it's a 2-story house, you put a floodlight on, floodlights, that's light pollution. You're talking about buffers for noise pollution in that area. I know the young lady who's in the back also is looking for some sort of buffer of white pines, or I just think they're very tall oaks. And right now, wintertime, you can see straight through to. So if you clear cut and put back some of that vegetation, I would like to see. I'm very adamant in the fact that I'd like to see some form of a buffer either in that zone, but then who would be responsible for maintaining trees that are planted in an open space area? Those are questions that I don't have the answers to, but my major concerns is the engineering. Is it going to affect the retaining pond that's behind, that and ultimately affects all of our properties over there? And then the noise pollution, and obviously someone mentioned something about livelihood and wildlife. I mean, there's 4 deer that are in my backyard this morning, so they, hopefully if we clear too much, they can at least have access from Broad Rock through down to Saugatucket River. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Chair. Ray Lang. I live at the southeast corner, and I appreciate the effort that you guys have made to put the pine trees there. However, a little bit concerned, not a big fan of white pine trees. There's a bunch of big ones that are on the edge of our property already, and they just litter our yard with pine needles. So if we can make a better choice there, the Thuja piccatas, that would be great. And if you're looking for ideas, on Route 138, Brandywine Court, which is a 55 and over development, they planted that with a bunch of spruce and Thuja piccatas also. There are a few white pines mixed in, but if you take a look there, it's absolutely beautiful. Provides a great screen.
Thank you.
So, was that yours? Yeah, if you could do that along our property, I'd be in love. That'd be great. And then another question is the mailbox area. We never saw that in the original plan. That seems to be new. May have just missed it. But that's also gonna, it's right when you come into the property, it's gonna kind of create like a parking lot type of situation. I was wondering if it might be a better idea to maybe put that down in the property to try to promote maybe some people walking to the mailboxes as opposed to pulling into the street and stopping right away and creating traffic out towards Broad Rock Road. I'm assuming that the idea of these cluster developments is to promote community. So maybe if that could be arranged to be moved, that would be great. If not, you know, I understand there's a lot of constraints with the mail system and stuff like that. So that's it.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Perhaps we can hear from the applicant or the applicant's landscape architect and engineer relative to some of the concerns that have been brought forward this evening.
For the record, Timothy Behan. I heard one question was the detention pond with the southern development versus ours. Our detention pond's much lower in elevation. There's no chance that our pond could ever overtop and go uphill. So I can just run through the elevations. Their detention pond's roughly elevation 69. And our overflow elevation's approximately elevation 60, so we are roughly 9 feet lower. I believe that's the only engineering question, or was there another one?
Oh, he already agreed
Yes,
to
we said
find
I'll work
an
with Mr.
alternative, yes.
Conboy on something.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. John?
So the question about, I'm not sure I entirely follow that. There's a 50-foot buffer zone between the development to the south, that property line, and the limit of disturbance. There's a line that says LOD, that's the limit of disturbance. That's intended to remain in perpetuity, including through the construction process. So it's very difficult to plant in a buffer zone, and well, let me rephrase that. It's very difficult to plant inside an existing wooded area. It's just not, you know, from a horticultural point of view, it's not easy to do. You're competing with mature trees, there's root zones and so forth. I don't really know how we could add plants there. And Jay, if you're the one running that, it was actually to the west. It wasn't, the gentleman down there just asked about the white pines, but yeah, down there, thank you. It's not practical to plant in there, so I don't know how we would do that. The neighborhood to the south, your neighborhood, actually also has an open space component to it. I don't recall if it's vegetated now or not, but that's supposed to be vegetated also. So it would have been, I think that was 10 feet or something, so it would have been additional space. But yeah, well. So I'm not trying to be evasive, we can't, it doesn't make any sense to put plants in there. I don't think you'd be digging holes in between mature trees. The stone wall that's to the, that's running along the edge of the buffer zone on the north, that's proposed, and that's going to be built at the developer's expense. And that's going to serve as a, we were talking about boundary markers for the buffer. That's going to be a very significant boundary marker. And that's the sort of the purpose of it, was to delineate that. So even though the property owner might own up to the buffer, up to the stone wall, that wall will prevent any clearing or any alterations inside. So there's 50 feet of vegetation that's going to remain there. And the gentleman asking about the white pines, we can come up with something else. They are, when they get big, I know they're messy, but they're just. Yep, we will address, we can change that out.
Yes, just come back up and state your name for the record. Wait till you get up to the mic,
Yes.
please.
Use the microphone.
Ryan Canis at 35 Woodman Circle. So I get what you're saying on all this. My concern is that the open space is open, and in the next 5 to 10 years, it could be, trees could fall down, and there's not much that's growing because of all the invasive vine that's in the area. So one possibility could be, maybe a suggestion, is on the border, you could plant the trees amongst the stone wall as it's going, because the trees could be planted on the clear-cut land. So it wouldn't be planted on the property, but could be planted on the boundaries of the area. I really think that, I mean, it's 50 feet is not that far. If you come by the property, come look at it, you know, you walk it with some stakes, and there's trees that are going to be right on that stone wall. I know for a fact. I mean, the wall will be probably built around that stone wall, but I think that, I'll be adamant, I do not want us to have to deal with the noise, and there won't be a buffer. It goes right into my backyard. You put 2-story houses, you're gonna have floodlights going into my backyard as well. People moved here to keep that rural country feel. I hear you talking about keeping that country feel, and I just think it'd be worthwhile to bring an arborist down there to look at some of these trees that are in that area. And if you're here talking to some other building projects about the invasive vines and stuff, and stuff's difficult to grow in those areas, it's open space, but you know, it's a possibility that the plantings can happen on the property line, not necessarily in that open space as a line. So, I mean, I've really at a loss of words to see that we can't come up with some sort of buffer, when I know for a fact in my development, I can't see her house in the back because there were trees that were planted on top of the retaining wall, and it's a nice buffer for her. We don't see that house at all, so.
Hi, Stephen Clark. Could I please respond to that? We are taking at a very costly expense, putting a stone wall behind lots 16, 17, 18, 19, whatever those lots are that border this subdivision, so that we have a defined property line of our 50-foot natural buffer. You heard it just a few minutes ago. The abutting neighborhood cleared to the wall. Maybe they should restore their buffer, and then would be better off. But we are doing a very defined method of boxing in our 50-foot natural buffer.
Sorry, Ryan Canis said 35 Woodman. A 3-foot wall is not going to take, you know,
So,
it's different, you know,
let me just stop you right there for a minute. Applicants are not necessarily required to buffer every single edge of the perimeter. We can ask for certain things to happen, but we can't.
I'm just looking for
force them.
something, you know.
Right, and as Mr. Clark said, it's also a good idea for neighboring property owners to be sure that they plant appropriate trees on their property as well, so that, you know, kind of works both ways. So we hear this on a regular basis.
And there is open space, common area, and there are trees and shrubs that are on that side too.
Correct. We only have, so much that we can
Okay,
require.
I
But
think that
thank
someone
you.
should go out and look at the property, the open space.
Yep. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I have a question, and I'm not sure who it's for. It might be for Mr. and Mrs. Webster, who live up to the northwest. But there's a square walled-in area on the top left-hand corner of the plans. Is that a historic cemetery?
David Webster, not yet. It's my vegetable garden.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I can't keep them away from your vegetable garden, but if it was a cemetery, I would say you can't be digging up the rocks over there by the cemetery. Okay. But I'm sure they'll leave your vegetable garden alone.
Any additional comments from staff based on this evening's conversation?
I think, Madam Chair, you heard significant testimony. If you read our project review memo, we did not prepare a motion for your consideration this evening. I think there were a few I's to dot and T's to cross with regards to finalizing the development proposal. The applicant has been extremely responsive to staff's comments to date, and we absolutely appreciate that coordination between the applicant and our staff. So again, your choice tonight would be to continue the public hearing, and I think if you continue the public hearing, it would be to respond to any revisions to the plans. You've heard significant testimony regarding this set of plans. Again, I think it's clarification of some of the things with regards to the mailbox location, clarity on, I understand the rebuild of the brand-new stone wall abutting 16, 17, 18, 19. I think we need to clarify the rebuild of the southern stone wall. Because again, all of these become regulatory components necessary to seek compliance for approvals to move forward. And our ability to eliminate any shade of grade and make things as black and white as we can only assists the planning board as well as the applicant as we move forward. I'm not sure, in my experience, there's necessarily an option to a riprap outlet to an emergency spillway, but again, that can be explored. I think simple things like with regards to the pull-off to the mailbox, potentially that could be a different pavement treatment. Perhaps it could be cobblestone or something else, so it makes it look less like a roadway and something different than that. So again, you have this kind of quaint country lane, and to the testimony tonight, you know, if you widen that there, it looks more like a parking lot and less like a country lane. There are techniques we can use. And again, the applicant and his willingness to rebuild stone walls appears to be doing a high-quality development here, and he potentially wouldn't be not open to the discussion and application of a different material at that pull-off. I want to say it doesn't snow in South Kingstown, but we were proven wrong this year. There was a little bit of snow. So again, you have to be concerned about the treatment of that because you still need to maintain and remove snow and ice over time. But again, the applicant has made sufficient revisions addressing staff comments as well as engineering comments from DPS. So I want to say we're really close. I think if the planning board felt comfortable, we would work with the applicant in the preceding month, and we would also develop a draft motion for your consideration at your meeting in March.
That makes sense, Jamie. One of the other comments that came up that will probably be a DPS question is boundary markers standard versus the boulders.
Madam Chair, earlier I had put, let me see if I can find it, if I still have it. Right here. This, I'm not sure if this is officially in our subdivision regulations, but we do have a town document that is rather dated that outlines the type of bounds that are to be used, for instance, a granite highway bound and an open space bound. The prescribed open space bound is a pressure-treated post with OS scribed on it, standing 3 feet off the ground, 4 feet subsurface. So
Or
it's,
sometimes we've used granite, correct?
sometimes we do, but
Yeah.
again, we have regulations that say this is how it should be. We do
Yeah.
sometimes alternate from that, but I think it's a good reminder to everybody that a lot of the discussion items that happen are already prescribed in the subdivision regulations, and if we're not going, we just need to be reminded that we follow the same protocol. And if the planning board feels that granite monumentation is more sufficient, that's your purview, but understanding that there is a requirement for a wooden post.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. What is the board's pleasure? Obviously, we're going to get a revised draft from staff, along with clarifications on the issues that have been discussed tonight. So we can either close the public hearing or leave it open. Like to hear from folks?
I'm okay with closing the public hearing. I think it's a good design. I'd like to see staff prepare a favorable motion based on tonight's discussion. I do think that the elevation view, as much as I liked it, I think it was not necessarily representing what we'll actually see for houses, so additional landscaping right next to Lot 1. But overall, I'd like to see a favorable motion prepared.
Anyone else?
I agree with Joe.
Robin?
In terms of mitigating the the sparseness of the buffer region, I think that one of the greatest offenses you experience from a neighbor is their lighting in the night, lighting up the woods. And so maybe it could be included in this plan that any lighting that would face the buffer zones might be of sufficient lighting that it's not going to come through those sparse parts, but be more directed to the ground. Is that something that we could put into the plan?
Okay. Commercial, yeah, but I understand, yeah.
Sorry, as it relates to light, we have less regulatory guidance as a residential development than we would normally under commercial or industrial settings. Again, 50 feet, fully vegetated, deciduous, is a buffer. You did hear testimony that there was an open space component to the development on the south, and that as far as a vegetated buffer does not exist, whether it was regulatory required or not, but their lawns go right to that stone wall. So again, some of the matters are regulatory related, and other matters we will work with the developer to see what they can do to address concerns of the planning board.
Robin does raise
Perhaps outside of the regulatory realm.
Right, and Robin does raise a good point. Lighting is often one of the most offensive areas for many folks, and on larger commercial type projects, we can require that it's dark sky compliant and hooded and so on. This is a little different from that type of a project.
And just understand it, on residential setting, I understand everyone's well-intentioned on lighting. A lot of things that we do on the regulatory side also have to look at the ability to enforce over time. And it's very difficult for a zoning enforcement officer over time, and again, we're looking 20 years from now, to look at a provision in a subdivision approval that says that no light shall shine on abutting property or affect them. A lot of those are judgmental in nature, and who makes that call and how do you enforce them, and what's the legal mechanism to enforce them when someone feels a light is pointed at them.
Other thoughts from board members on public hearing, keeping it open or closing it? Heard from two people. Liz?
I think we should close.
Caper?
Yeah.
Susan?
We're not getting more testimony.
Okay. Would someone like to make that motion? Motion to close the public hearing from Peter, second.
I'll second.
Second from Liz. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Jamie, you have the list of discussion topics for this evening, which will enable you to draft an appropriate motion along with consultation with the applicant.
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Jamie, one thing that hasn't been mentioned, and I think Jay brought up, that is not yet reflected in the plans is selection of the affordable units, whether they're going to be ownership or rental, and AMI levels.
And again, we will clarify that for
Yeah,
approval
I believe it was
motion.
in the memo. Not the,
My
not
point,
the ownership versus rental, but I
Yeah.
think they were called out
my point was that I didn't notice them called out on the plan
on the
to
plan.
identify and locate where they are.
I'd also add that I think it was item 28, doesn't read right. Is that page 6 maybe? I already put it away.
Right, the sentence, there's no end to the sentence.
Yeah, it's a bad sentence. I don't know what it's supposed to mean.
Yeah, it says the applicant shall evaluate the impact of invasive species impact on site and how the development,
Period.
yeah.
We'll clarify that in any motion
Okay.
that's drafted.
So if you're looking at working with what we have so far, I wasn't clear on a waiver request for the letter of eligibility from Rhode Island Housing.
That's not applicable. That was a typo. That's for a comprehensive permit. This is not a comprehensive permit.
So they do not need a...
Correct.
They do not.
So then, I'm sorry, what's the mechanism? How is that enforced if they...
This is just a flexible design residential subdivision. It's not being submitted as a comprehensive permit where they're asking for relief. Usually it's a density type of relief. This is just a conventional...
No waiver here.
There's no waiver, there's no requirement for that reference. It's not required for this type of project. If it were a comp permit, yes, they would need it.
And as you can see, an FDRP is much better in terms of design, ability to enhance the area, and communication with the town and applicant.
Right. Sorry, I have one more thing, and maybe we shouldn't have closed the public hearing before I asked. Mr. Clark has indicated here that we're talking about having these lots deed restricted for a period of 30 years. And I wonder if there has been any conversation about making that longer than 30 years, or if they would consider that option, because in 30 years, we're going to be in the same pickle we're in right now.
I can confirm that our inclusionary zoning ordinance requires 99 years. Comprehensive permits require a minimum of 30, I believe, or 33, something like that. So I'm going to check the subregs again, specifically under the FDRP regs, and see if there's a separate requirement there. But the zoning ordinance for inclusionary zoning requires 99 years. Correct.
Thank you.
Anything else from anyone? All right, thanks very much. We will see you next meeting. The board's going to take a 5-minute break, which we usually do at 9 o'clock, and it's now 25 past.
What's the new one? Back in your day. I know. It's an antique.
All right, we're continuing on to our agenda item F, request acceptance of roads and infrastructure, Michaela Court, South County Trail subdivision. Jamie.
So, Madam Chair, you do have a staff memo. We do have a request for Michaela Court, which is associated with South County Trail subdivision, for the town to accept the roadway and any infrastructure associated with the roadway. That doesn't include the detention basins and the pipe runs to that. That ends up being with the homeowners association. What we're looking for is approval authority from the planning board to staff. We still have to dot some i's, cross some t's with engineering, as well as language in the HOA potentially. But again, it's moving this forward, finalizing documentation because it's required to go to town council for adoption, including a revision to the ordinance, which requires the acknowledgement of the actual stop sign. Each stop sign in town is associated with an ordinance kind of line item. So again, there are a couple things we need to do, but this is in essence the first step in the process of ultimately turning that paper street to a public street.
Any questions from board members?
I have one. So can you tell me the difference between accepting Michaela Court as a street and how, and if that ties into enforcement of their buffers and open space, which seems to be in violation all over these maps? Like, is it completely unrelated, or is there a way to link in the, what should be mandatory compliance with open space?
Separate issues. So any non-compliance with the open space markers, again, we've, Mark Walker from the Department of Public Services has been on site. All the open space markers were in place, verified. Mr. Skeffington's in the back. He's the developer, Mr. Bertucci's in the front. Mr. Skeffington is also a representative of the development team. They have reinstalled open space markers on 3 or 4 occasions. They continue to be removed by landowners within the development to the point where the last installation was literally immediately verified by DPS so that they could check that regulatory box for fear that a landowner would, within a day, remove them. There's a point where the developer has fulfilled their obligations, and then it's issue with the landowner or the HOA and no longer with the developer. So potentially out here with regards to open space markers, that may be a continued issue, or we'll call it ongoing over time. But again, prove that someone removed it. I don't know who did it, even though in one occasion they were leaning in the person's garage. But even then, it was like, I don't like them, they're ugly, you put them in, I'm going to pull them out. So that's why I think in some of the discussions, we're looking for more permanent markers, whether it's Mr. Alex in his Curtis Corner, you'll be hard pressed to remove those open space buffers.
Giant boulders.
Again, they probably need to be about a third of that size, but again, he made sure that those are not moving. So DPS is finalizing all the review process with regards to compliance with as-built and compliance with any boundary markers associated with that development. So again, we will assure compliance before it goes to council. But I want to say we can assure compliance on the day we look at it, not necessarily the day after. That's the difficulty with this development. We do have one thing to button up, and that's reviewing the HOA language as it relates to maintenance of the basins. There's a section that may fall slightly short on clear obligation of the HOA and the responsibilities to maintain drainage structures outside of the road footprint. But again, the developer's aware of that, and we'll work through that. But we'd like to move it to the next phase.
If there are no other questions, we have two motions, one of which begins on page 1.
All set?
Yes.
The South Kingstown Planning Board hereby authorizes Town Finance Director to release all existing financial surety associated with South County Trail subdivision that was previously established on a guarantee of the completion of the site infrastructure and landscaping. For the prior release of the bond, the applicant shall, 1, submit any maintenance bond as required by DPS for those improvements associated with the subdivision prior to consideration for acceptance by the town council, and 2, submit an operation and maintenance plan for review and approval by the town's administrative officer associated with the development, stormwater management facilities, and make any necessary revisions to the homeowners association, clearly identify the responsibility of the HOA maintenance of such facilities. Final approval by the town's administrative officer shall be done in consultation with the Director of Public Service and the town's legal counsel. And 3, request the town council to accept the streets and signs associated with this subdivision, and also request an amendment of Chapter 10, Article 1, Section 10-12, motor vehicles and traffic, boulevards and street stop signs designated as to include the stop sign within this development. Prior to the release of any financial surety, the Director of Public Services and Administrative Officer shall certify the items outlined above have been completed to their satisfaction.
We have a motion from Joe. Do we have a second? Second. Second from Peter. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. And motion number 2, which is on page 2.
I'll continue on. The South Kingstown Planning Board hereby recommends that upon release of the performance bond and the submittal of the maintenance bond, the town council accepts Michaela Court, a street serving the residents of South County Trail subdivision, State Route 2/South County Trail.
Motion from Joe. Is there a second? Second. Second from Caper. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thanks. Good luck. That brings us to the end of our agenda. Jamie, can... Oh. Oh, wait, for which topic? Well...
It's
Peter?
not a public hearing, and the vote's been taken, so.
Okay, not a public hearing.
Is he allowed to speak to him?
Not a public hearing.
So there will be a vote of the council to
So this will
accept
also
this
go
bridge.
forward to the town council.
Is there an estimated timeline for that?
Advertising, right?
Again, as I mentioned, there are a few items
few
we need to work
housekeeping
out
items,
with
yeah.
DPS, potentially HOA revisions and maintenance responsibilities, which would fall upon your group. So, again, there's notice requirements, so you're looking at potentially 1 to 2 months, possibly 3. But you've been waiting a while. We'll get it done.
Since 2017.
So.
Thanks. TRC, date?
I want to say sometime in March. Just bear with me. March 12th. Everybody's
March
scrambling.
12th. Do we have a volunteer for March 12th? All right, Joe, thank you. Morning or afternoon?
I'm okay with that. Normal morning, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there good stuff on there?
Sounds good. We have our work session coming up in March. And I know we had asked for some continuity with regard to Old Tower Hill Road project, so planning on that. Anything else, Jamie, that we should be aware of prior to the work session?
The only mention tonight was if we can get a motion ready, we may add that to the work session. Again, I'll work with the chair on anything we have pending on the regulatory side that we want to discuss at the work session. But primary,
Okay.
continuing on with Old Tower Hill.
Sounds good. Motion to adjourn? Motion from Joe, second? Second from Liz. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Meeting adjourned.
Yes.